My dad called me a failure at my graduation years later. He was asking for my help. I'll never forget the way the cap felt on my head that day. Slightly too tight, the tassel brushing against my cheek every time I turned. It was May 2022 and the gymnasium at Northwestern University was packed with families, their phones held high to capture every moment. The air smelled like a mixture of cheap folding chairs, floral perfumes, and that distinct scent of anticipation that only comes with major life milestones. I was 22 years old, and I had just earned my bachelor's degree in business administration with a concentration in marketing. It hadn't been easy. 4 years of late nights, part-time jobs, student loans that made my stomach turn every time I checked the balance, and countless moments of self-doubt. But I'd done it. My name was called, Ethan Michael Crawford, and I walked across that stage with my head held high. The applause was polite, standard, the kind you give to every graduate because it's the right thing to do. I shook the dean's hand, accepted my diploma holder. The actual degree would come in the mail 6 weeks later, and smiled for the official photographer. In that moment I felt like I was floating. All the sacrifice, all the struggle, it had led to this. I couldn't wait to celebrate with my family afterward. My mother had flown in from Phoenix. She'd been living there since the divorce when I was 16, working as a nurse at a county hospital. My younger sister, Maya, had driven up from Chicago where she was finishing her sophomore year at DePaul. And then there was my father, Richard Crawford, who still lived in Evanston, just 20 minutes from campus. He was a successful real estate developer, the kind of man who wore expensive suits even on weekends and measured his worth by the square footage of properties he owned. After the ceremony, we all met at an Italian restaurant in downtown Evanston called Campagnola. It was one of those places with white tablecloths, dim lighting, and waiters who describe every dish like they're reading poetry. My mother had made the reservation weeks in advance. She'd ordered a small cake with, "Congratulations, Ethan," written in blue frosting. I remember thinking how thoughtful that was, how she always tried to make moments special even when money was tight for her. We were seated at a round table near the window. Outside, the afternoon sun was filtering through the trees that lined the street, casting dappled shadows on the sidewalk. Maya was excited, talking about her upcoming summer internship at a marketing firm. My mother kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, emotional in that way mothers get when they see their children reach milestones. And my father sat there, silent, checking his phone periodically, his jaw set in that way that told me he was somewhere else mentally. The appetizers arrived, bruschetta and calamari. We made small talk about the ceremony, about how long it had taken, about the speaker who'd gone on too long, about finding your passion in an uncertain world. I was just starting to relax, just beginning to let myself enjoy the moment, when my father set his phone down with a deliberate click against the table. "So, Ethan," he said, his voice cutting through the pleasant hum of conversation. "What's next?" It was a fair question. A normal question. But the way he asked it, with that slight edge, that tone that suggested he already knew my answer would disappoint him, that made my stomach tighten. "I've got a few job applications out," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Marketing positions, mostly entry-level stuff. I had a good interview with a digital agency last week. They said they'd get back to me by the end of the month." My father leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He was 53, still fit from his twice-weekly tennis games at the country club, his hair salt and pepper in that way that made him look distinguished rather than old. "Entry-level," he repeated as if the words tasted bad. 4 years of college and you're aiming for entry-level." My mother jumped in quickly. "Richard, he just graduated today. Let's not." "I'm just saying," he interrupted, not even looking at her, his eyes fixed on me, "that I'd hoped for more. I paid for half of that education, you know. I expected some return on that investment." The table went quiet. Maya was staring at her plate. My mother's hand had frozen halfway to her water glass. I felt heat rising up my neck, the kind of embarrassment that makes your skin prickle. "Dad, I worked hard," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I graduated with honors. I'm doing everything I can to." "Honors?" He scoffed, actually laughed a little, that bitter sound that wasn't really amusement. "You know what honors mean in the real world? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You think a piece of paper with Latin on it is going to make you successful? You think that's going to put you in a position like mine?" I could feel everyone at nearby tables starting to notice. Conversations were getting quieter. People were glancing over. "I just need time," I said, my voice smaller now, "to find the right opportunity." My father shook his head slowly, deliberately. "You want to know what I think? I think you're going to end up like all those other kids who majored in something soft, something easy. You're going to bounce from job to job, never really making anything of yourself. You had every advantage, good schools, support, connections, and you chose marketing." "Marketing." He said it like it was a disease. "Richard, that's enough," my mother said, her voice sharp now, but he was on a roll. I'm just being honest. Someone has to be. You want me to lie? To tell him he's going to be fine when I can see exactly where this is heading. He turned to me fully now, and what he said next I can still hear perfectly even now, even after everything that's happened since. You're going to fail, Ethan. You're going to amount to nothing. You have no drive, no real ambition. You're soft. And the real world is going to chew you up and spit you out. The words landed like physical blows. My sister was crying quietly. My mother stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. But I just sat there, frozen, feeling like every eye in that restaurant was on me, feeling like I was shrinking, getting smaller and smaller. My father threw his napkin on the table and stood up. I'm going to pay for this meal and then I'm leaving. Congratulations on your degree. I hope I'm wrong about you. I really do. But the way he said it made it clear he didn't think he was wrong at all. He walked to the front to settle the bill, and I sat there in the ruins of what was supposed to be one of the best days of my life. My mother was hugging me, saying things I couldn't really hear. Maya was apologizing for him, which she always did. But all I could think about was his words. You're going to fail. You're going to amount to nothing. I left that restaurant with my diploma and a weight I hadn't carried before. Shame. Deep, burning shame. And underneath it something else starting to grow. Not yet anger, not quite. But a determination, quiet and fierce, to prove him wrong. To become someone he couldn't dismiss. To succeed so thoroughly that he'd have to eat every word he'd said that day. I didn't know it then, but that humiliation would become fuel. The kind that burns slow and steady for years. The months after graduation were harder than I'd expected. Not just because of the job search, though that was brutal in its own right, but because my father's words had burrowed deep into my brain like parasites. Every rejection email felt like confirmation of what he'd said. Every interview that didn't lead anywhere felt like proof that I was, in fact, going to fail. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Logan Square, a neighborhood on Chicago's northwest side that was still affordable if you didn't mind thin walls and radiators that clanged all night in winter. The place was 400 square feet, maybe less. My bed was also my couch. My kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd saved from my campus job and a small loan from my mother that I promised to pay back as soon as I could. For the first 3 months, I worked at a Starbucks on Milwaukee Avenue. The early morning shift started at 4:30, which meant waking up at 3:45 to catch the bus in the dark. Chicago in early fall can be beautiful, but at that hour, it's just cold and empty. I'd make lattes and frappuccinos for commuters who barely looked at me, and during the slow periods I'd check my phone obsessively, waiting for callbacks that rarely came. The digital agency that had seemed so promising? They'd gone with someone else, someone with more experience. A marketing coordinator position at a nonprofit? Filled internally. An entry-level role at a tech startup? They decided to hire 2 interns instead to save money. Each rejection added another brick to the wall I was building between myself and hope. But here's what my father didn't know about me, what he'd never bothered to learn. I was stubborn. Maybe it was a family trait. Maybe I'd inherited it from him, ironically. But once something got under my skin, I couldn't let it go. His words had gotten under my skin. I started teaching myself skills that I hadn't fully developed in college. I took free online courses in digital marketing, SEO, content strategy, social media analytics. I'd come home from my Starbucks shift smelling like coffee and milk, and I'd sit at my laptop for hours, working through tutorials, building sample campaigns for imaginary clients, creating a portfolio that proved I could do more than make cappuccinos. My mother called every week. She never mentioned that day at the restaurant, but I could hear the worry in her voice, the careful way she'd ask how I was doing. Maya texted constantly, sending me memes and encouragement. But I hadn't spoken to my father since graduation. Not once. And honestly, I didn't want to. The anger was useful. Kept me going when everything else felt pointless. In December, 7 months after graduation, something shifted. I applied for a junior marketing associate position at a mid-sized consulting firm downtown called Meridian Strategies. I didn't expect much. It was my 43rd application that month. But the hiring manager, a woman named Patricia Chen, actually called me. Not emailed. The interview was different from the others. Patricia was in her 40s, sharp and direct, and she seemed more interested in what I'd taught myself than what I'd learned in school. I showed her my portfolio, walked her through campaigns I'd created from scratch, explained my thinking. At the end of the hour, she said something I'll never forget. You've got something a lot of candidates don't have. You're hungry. I can work with hungry. They offered me the position 3 days before Christmas. The salary wasn't amazing, $42,000 a year, but it was a start. A real start. I called my mother first and she cried. I texted Maya, who sent back about 30 celebration emojis. And I thought about calling my father, about telling him I'd gotten a real job, that I was on my way. But I didn't. The wound was still too fresh. And part of me wanted to wait until I had more to show him. Until I was undeniable. I threw myself into that job like my life depended on it. Because in a way it did. I was always the first one in the office and the last to leave. I volunteered for projects other people didn't want. I learned everything I could from everyone around me. Patricia became an unexpected mentor, teaching me not just about marketing but about navigating corporate politics, about building relationships, about playing the long game. The firm specialized in helping mid-sized companies develop their brand strategies and digital presence. My role was mostly execution at first. Writing copy, managing social media accounts, coordinating with designers. But I paid attention to everything. I sat in on client meetings I wasn't required to attend. I studied how the senior strategists presented ideas, how they handled objections, how they turned skeptical clients into believers. By my 6th month, I'd helped land a major client, a regional restaurant chain looking to expand into new markets. I'd put together a presentation on my own time, a complete brand refresh proposal with market research and projected ROI. Patricia had been impressed enough to let me pitch it alongside her. We got the account. And suddenly people knew my name. The raise came at my 1-year review. $55,000. It wasn't huge, but it was progress. Measurable, undeniable progress. I moved to a better apartment in Wicker Park, one with an actual bedroom and windows that didn't rattle when the wind blew. I paid my mother back the loan with interest she tried to refuse. I started saving money for the first time in my life. But more than the money, it was the confidence. Every successful campaign, every satisfied client, every compliment from Patricia or a colleague, they were like medicine, slowly healing the wound my father had opened. I was becoming someone. Not just someone, but someone who mattered, someone who contributed, someone who was good at what they did. I still thought about that day at the restaurant, though. Late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd replay his words. You're going to fail. You're going to amount to nothing. And each time they hurt a little less. Not because I'd forgiven him, I hadn't, but because I was building evidence to the contrary. Brick by brick, accomplishment by accomplishment, I was constructing a life that proved him wrong. At 18 months in, I was promoted to marketing strategist. At 2 years, I was leading my own projects, managing junior associates, presenting directly to C-level executives. The kid who'd been humiliated at graduation, who'd worked early morning shifts at Starbucks wondering if he'd ever find his way, that kid was gone. Or maybe not gone, but transformed. Hardened. Sharpened. I'd become exactly the kind of person my father couldn't dismiss. And I'd done it without his help, without his approval, without anything from him except the motivation that came from wanting desperately to prove him wrong. 3 years after graduation, I got a call from Maya. She sounded worried, talking fast the way she does when she's anxious. It took me a moment to understand what she was saying, and when I did, I felt something complicated twist in my chest. Dad was in trouble. Financial trouble. The real estate market had shifted badly, and he'd made some risky investments that hadn't panned out. He was facing serious losses, possibly bankruptcy. He needed help. And somehow, someway I was in a position to give it. Maya's voice on the phone was shaky and I could hear traffic in the background. She was probably walking between classes, or maybe she'd stepped outside specifically to call me. It was mid-October, 3 years and 5 months since that graduation dinner, and I was in my office at Meridian. A real office now with a door and a window overlooking South Wacker Drive. I'd been reviewing a pitch deck for a pharmaceutical client when her name lit up my screen. Ethan, I don't know how to say this, she started, and I could immediately tell something was wrong. Maya was usually upbeat, the kind of person who could find the silver lining in anything. But now she sounded exhausted, defeated even. It's Dad. He's in real trouble. I leaned back in my chair, watching the Chicago skyline through my window. The afternoon sun was hitting the buildings just right, turning glass into gold. What kind of trouble? She took a breath and I heard her voice crack slightly. Financial. Bad financial. You know how he's always been so confident about his investments, about the real estate market? Well, apparently he bet big on some development projects that fell through. Commercial properties that were supposed to be slam dunks. But the market shifted, interest rates changed, and his investors pulled out. He's leveraged everything, Ethan. Everything. The house, his savings, even borrowed against his retirement accounts. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My father had always been wealthy, or at least he'd always seemed that way. The nice house in Evanston, the luxury cars, the country club membership, the expensive restaurants. He'd built his identity around success, around being the guy who made smart decisions and came out on top. The idea of him failing, truly failing, seemed almost impossible. How bad is it? I asked. He might lose the house. He's already sold one of his cars. He's cutting every expense he can, but it might not be enough. Mom said he looks like he's aged 10 years in the past 6 months. She still talks to him sometimes, about family stuff. She's worried about him. Of course she was. My mother had always been the compassionate one, the one who forgave easily, who could separate the man my father had become from the man she'd once loved. But I wasn't there yet. Nowhere close. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Maya was quiet for a moment. Because he needs help, Ethan. And you're doing well now. Really well. I see your LinkedIn, the promotions, the articles you've written. You've made something of yourself. Mom's so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. But Dad isn't, I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I don't know what Dad is, Maya admitted. He doesn't talk about you. Ever. And when Mom or I bring you up, he changes the subject. Ethan. I think he's ashamed. Not of you. Of himself. Of what he said. He's just too proud to admit it. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Below, people moved like ants along the sidewalk, everyone rushing somewhere, everyone caught up in their own struggles and triumphs. Has he asked for my help? No, Maya said quickly. God, no. He doesn't know I'm calling you. He'd probably be furious if he knew. But I'm asking. I'm asking because he's our father, and despite everything, I don't want to see him lose everything. And also because I think you're the only one who might actually be able to help. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time just thinking. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening. My assistant knocked once to ask if I needed anything, and I waved her away. I needed to process this to understand what I was feeling. Part of me, a large part, felt a dark satisfaction. The man who'd called me a failure, who'd said I'd amount to nothing, was now the one struggling. There was a poetic justice to it, a symmetry that felt almost too perfect. I could do nothing. I could let him fail the way he'd predicted I would. No one would blame me. Maya would understand eventually. My mother would be disappointed, but she'd understand too. But there was another part of me, quieter but insistent, that remembered who I'd become. I'd spent 3 years proving I wasn't the person my father thought I was. I'd built a career, a reputation, a life based on competence and integrity. And people with integrity don't abandon family, even family that's hurt them. Even family that maybe doesn't deserve help. I thought about Patricia, my mentor, who'd once told me that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy, but what they do when it costs them something. Anyone can be kind to people who are kind to them, she'd said. The real test is whether you can be decent to people who haven't been decent to you. That evening I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the television in the background, some news program. Ethan, sweetheart, how are you? Maya called me, I said. About Dad. There was a pause, and then the television went silent. I see. Is it as bad as she says? My mother sighed, that deep, weary sound that parents make when they're worried about their children, no matter how old those children are. It's bad, honey. He made some decisions that didn't work out. The economy shifted in ways he didn't anticipate. And Richard, you know how he is, he doesn't ask for help. He just keeps trying to fix things himself even when it's clear he can't. He humiliated me, Mom. In public. On what should have been one of the best days of my life. I know, she said softly. I was there. I haven't forgotten. And I don't expect you to forget either. But I also know you, Ethan. You're not the kind of person who can walk away from someone in trouble, even if that someone has hurt you. It's not in your nature. She was right, and I hated that she was right. I'd spent 3 years being angry, using that anger as motivation. But anger is exhausting. And at some point you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Not what kind of person someone else's actions have made you, but who you choose to be despite those actions. I need to think about this, I told her. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Ethan, whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you help him, that's beautiful. If you don't, I'll understand. This is your choice. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about that restaurant, about the way my father had looked at me with such certainty that I would fail. But I also thought about something else. Something I'd almost forgotten. I was 8 years old and I'd fallen off my bike, scraped my knees badly. My father had picked me up, carried me inside, cleaned the wounds so gently. You're tougher than you think, he'd said. Crawford men don't stay down. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe he'd built his entire identity around never staying down, around always winning, and when he saw me choosing a path different from his, he saw it as weakness. Maybe his words at graduation weren't really about me at all. Maybe they were about his own fears, his own insecurities projected onto his son. By morning I'd made my decision. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in over 3 years. It rang 4 times and I almost hung up. Then I heard his voice, gruff and tired. Hello. Dad, I said. It's Ethan. We need to talk. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Then I heard him clear his throat, That awkward sound people make when they're caught off guard and trying to compose themselves. Ethan, he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Uncertainty, maybe. Or fear. This is unexpected. Maya told me about your situation, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I was standing in my apartment looking out at the city waking up. It was 6:30 in the morning and I'd been awake since 4, rehearsing this conversation in my head. She's worried about you. Another pause. She shouldn't have bothered you with this. It's not your problem. She's my sister. You're my father. That makes it my problem whether I like it or not. The words came out harsher than I'd intended and I heard him take a sharp breath. Look, I don't need your pity, he started, and there it was. That familiar defensiveness, that pride that had defined him for as long as I could remember. I've gotten myself into this situation and I'll get myself out. I always do. Will you? I asked. Because from what Maya told me it sounds like you're out of options. Unless she's exaggerating. He didn't answer right away. I could hear something in the background, maybe a coffee maker or traffic outside his window. It's complicated, he finally said. The market turned against me. Projects I'd invested in fell through. Investors got cold feet. It's a perfect storm of bad timing and bad luck. And bad decisions? I added. Yes, he admitted, and the word sounded like it had been pulled from him with pliers. And bad decisions. I thought I could predict the market. I thought I knew better than everyone else. I was wrong. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. Not an actual apology but an admission of failure, which for Richard Crawford might have been even harder. I want to meet with you, I said. Face to face. Look at your finances, see what can be done. I have some connections now, people who specialize in financial restructuring. And I've learned a few things about strategic planning and crisis management in my line of work. You want to help me? He sounded genuinely confused, almost suspicious. After everything? I want to see if you can be helped, I corrected. Whether I actually help you depends on a lot of factors. But yeah, I'm willing to look at it. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a coffee shop in Evanston, Cupital. Do you know it? I know it, he said quietly. Tomorrow. What time? 10 in the morning. Dad, bring everything. Bank statements, loan documents, investment portfolios, all of it. If I'm going to do this, I need complete transparency. All right, he agreed. 10 o'clock. I'll be there. After I hung up, I sat down on my couch, feeling exhausted despite the early hour. I'd done it. I'd reached out. Now I had to figure out if I'd made the right choice or just reopened a wound that had finally started to heal. The next morning, I got to Cupital 15 minutes early. It was a crisp November day, the kind where you could see your breath but the sun was bright enough to make you squint. The coffee shop was busy with college students and remote workers, the air thick with the smell of espresso and baked goods. I ordered a black coffee and claimed a table in the back corner, somewhere relatively private. My father arrived exactly at 10. I saw him through the window before he came in and Maya was right, he looked older. His hair had gone almost completely gray. His face was thinner, more drawn. He was wearing a jacket I recognized from years ago, slightly worn at the elbows. The confident, commanding presence I'd always associated with him seemed diminished somehow, like he'd physically shrunk. He spotted me and walked over, carrying a leather messenger bag that looked heavy. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. He just sat down across from me and set the bag on the floor. You look good, he said. Successful. I'm doing all right, I replied. Coffee. He shook his head. I'm fine. Let's get to it. He pulled out folders and documents, spreading them across the table. As I reviewed everything, the picture became clearer and worse. He'd invested heavily in 3 commercial development projects, borrowing against his assets to maximize potential returns. When 2 of the projects collapsed due to zoning issues and investor pullouts, he doubled down on the third, convinced it would save him. It hadn't. He was facing foreclosure on his house within 90 days. His retirement accounts were depleted. He had outstanding loans totaling nearly $2 million. Jesus, Dad, I muttered, looking at the numbers. How did you let it get this bad? Pride, he said simply. I kept thinking I could fix it, that the next deal would turn things around, that admitting I needed help was the same as admitting I'd failed. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Kind of like what I accused you of. Ironic, isn't it? I didn't know what to say to that, so I focused on the documents. My mind was already working through possibilities, connections, solutions. At Meridian, I'd helped companies restructure, pivot, rebuild. This wasn't that different, just more personal. Okay, I said after a long silence. Here's what I think we can do. You need to sell some assets immediately. Anything that has value but isn't essential. The vacation property in Wisconsin if you still have it. The boat, if that's still around. That'll buy you time. Then we need to negotiate with your creditors. I know someone, a consultant who specializes in debt restructuring. He owes me a favor. We can probably get your payment terms extended, maybe even get some of the debt forgiven if we demonstrate financial hardship. My father was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've really thought about this. I spent all yesterday thinking about it, I admitted. And this morning, I made some calls. People I've worked with, people who know people. There's a path here, Dad. It's not going to be easy and you're going to have to make some hard choices. You'll probably lose the house. There's no way around that. But bankruptcy? We might be able to avoid that. You can rebuild. Why are you doing this? He asked suddenly. I was terrible to you. I said things that I can never take back. Things I'm ashamed of. You have every right to tell me to go to hell. I took a sip of my coffee, considering my answer carefully. A few years ago I probably would have. Right after graduation I was so angry at you I could barely function. Your words followed me everywhere. Every failure felt like confirmation that you were right. Every small success felt like it wasn't enough to prove you wrong. Ethan. I held up my hand. Let me finish. I used that anger as fuel. I worked harder than I've ever worked at anything, partly because I loved what I was doing, but mostly because I wanted to shove my success in your face. I wanted you to have to eat every word you said to me. He looked down at his hands and I saw them trembling slightly. But somewhere along the way, I continued, I realized something. Building a life just to prove someone wrong isn't really building a life at all. Still letting that person control you, just in a different way. I needed to become successful for me, not because of you or in spite of you. Just for me. And did you, he asked quietly, become successful for yourself? I'm getting there, I said honestly. It's a process, but helping you now, that's not about you. It's about me. It's about the kind of person I want to be. The kind of man who can extend a hand to someone who's drowning, even if that someone pushed him under once. My father's eyes were wet now and he wasn't trying to hide it. I was wrong about you, he said, his voice thick. Completely wrong. You're not a failure. You never were. I was projecting my own fears onto you. I was so terrified of my own mediocrity that I lashed out at you for choosing a different path than mine. Sorry, Ethan. I'm so damn sorry. It was the apology I'd wanted for 3 years. And now that I had it, I realized it didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the hurt or the years of distance. But it was something. A starting point. I appreciate that, I said. And I'm going to help you because it's the right thing to do. But Dad, we're going to have to rebuild more than just your finances. We need to rebuild trust. Our relationship. And that's going to take time. A lot of time. I understand, he said, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. Over the next 6 months, we worked together to stabilize his situation. I connected him with my debt specialist, and we managed to restructure his loans with better terms. He sold the vacation property, the boat, and eventually the house in Evanston. It was hard for him. That house had been his symbol of success for 20 years. But he moved into a modest condo in Skokie, something he could actually afford. I helped him develop a plan to restart his business on a smaller scale, focusing on consultation rather than development. He had knowledge and experience, he just needed to learn to use them differently. We met every other week, sometimes to discuss business, sometimes just to talk. Slowly, carefully, we began building something new. Not the father-son relationship we'd had before. That was gone, broken beyond repair. But something different. Something based on mutual respect rather than expectation. My mother told me once that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing. It's about releasing the hold that anger has on you. It's about choosing freedom over resentment. I think I understand that now. Standing here today, looking back at that graduation day and everything that's happened since, I realized something important. My father's words didn't break me. They changed me, sure. They pushed me in directions I might not have gone otherwise. But I'm stronger for it. More resilient. More certain of who I am and what I'm capable of. And my father, he's different too. Humbler. More thoughtful. We'll never have a perfect relationship and I've made peace with that. But we have something real now, something built on honesty rather than performance. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us the most valuable lessons. Not through their wisdom but through their failings. My father taught me that success isn't about money or status or proving others wrong. It's about integrity, resilience, and the courage to be kind even when kindness costs you something. He called me a failure once. Now he calls me for advice. The tables have turned, but not in the way I once imagined they would. There's no satisfaction in his struggle, no vindication in being the one with answers. There's just the quiet knowledge that I became someone worth becoming, not because of his words or despite them, but because I chose to. And that choice, more than anything else, is what defines success.